What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Acquire and Operate. We are buying and building a portfolio of small, enduring, niche, vertical B2B SaaS businesses. A lot of jargon in there, but that's what we're up to. We're doing it in public, hopefully to inspire others, to have
That's right.
inspire conversation, to critique our methods. Kind of high tides, all ships rise. So let's make most of this stuff a conversation. And we're here today. The topic du jour is benchmarking your SaaS firm with a few prompts. And this is an operating concept. It's also an acquisition concept. And I think to start and just to give you a taste of what's coming, I think the first thing is just kind of like a worldview where we're of the position that benchmarking equals the value creation roadmap. So it's like one of the most important exercises you can possibly do. And so we'll talk about why we believe that. We'll talk about some key metrics and benchmarks. And then we'll talk about benchmarking your P&L or forecast with a few prompts. And then we've got a little example output just to give you a sense of what that whole exercise looks like. I'm riding with Kjael, the birthday boy, a few days late, but the birthday boy nonetheless. How we doing?
I'm feeling pretty good, man. It's definitely been one heck of a week, having your birthday while also digging through a ton of data, coming up with these sessions. We're here for the users and the listeners. So, like we always say, you can't measure what you haven't defined. So I'm excited to be talking about benchmarks.
Beautiful. Cool. So I think to kick off, like, again, I think, man, I did not used to appreciate benchmarks and base rates. And like my
Who
fitness,
did? It's
yeah,
always like, yeah, we got to accomplish this thing. 2% growth. Yeah, let's see how we can do this. It's like, wait,
it's like,
where are you today?
yeah, it's like, let's do 50% growth. How about that? Nah, let's shoot for 60. All right. Sounds good to me. I think like my fitness journey has been like a really good analogy. And so the way I say it is, let's say you want to get stronger. One thing to do is to just go in the gym and just put a million pounds on the rack and try to squat it. And inevitably the rack is going to squish you and you're going to die. Another way to do it is like, okay, I'm going to establish base rates for my strength. So I'm going to do a bench, a squat, pull-ups, whatever, a deadlift. Cool. Now I know what my base rates are. And then from there, we've always spoken about, because in the world period, it's not very easy to get your hand on benchmarks. But in the absence of benchmarks, you use your base rates and then you apply some rational rate of improvement. So it's like, hey, I want to get 10% stronger every quarter. Cool. Then this is where benchmarks get interesting. So instead it would be like, cool, I've got my base rates. I know that I bench press more than my peer group, which is 6 foot, 165 pound, 36-year-old males. So I know I bench more than I'm an outperformer in bench. I'm an outperformer in pull-ups, but my squat is terrible. And if your goal was just overall balanced strength, you would index your fitness plan towards squatting, because you know that you're below average in that strength component as a function of your performance relative to your closest peer group. So that's exactly what we're talking about. Because the worst thing you want to do, like in a business context, is like, oh man, like, let's just try to generate more opportunities. And it's like, actually, you're generating a shitload of opportunities. Like the challenge is that your win rate is terrible. And then that totally recalibrates your entire focus and how you think about where the or like kind of the performance gains are in the business. So all to say, that's what we're here to talk about today. And because literally it's like, in the context of making a business more valuable, transforming a business, whether you operate it today, whether you're thinking about acquiring it, whether you're thinking about selling it, like a point of view on these dimensions is useful in almost any context. So just think, once you have a relative point of view on performance across various metrics, that is literally your value creation roadmap. It's like as simple as that, right?
Defining your benchmark defines your universe, tells you the path to take.
Exactly. And the main thing is that everything's relative in this world, right? So you want to understand, it's the same with houses. Or it's like, hey, and you can think about it the exact same. Okay, so I looked at houses. Our house is trading at $1 million. It turns out that other houses that are identical to us in every way, but they have one more bathroom, are trading at $1.5 million. And it's like, well, guess what we should do? Let's add a bathroom, and it's like, cool. Like it just simplifies things so much. So
and now that's a second benchmarking exercise. How much do bathroom renovations cost in this market.
Or then it becomes an ROI, right? So it's like, we know that we can spend $50K to add a bathroom and it's going to generate $400K in home equity
Yep.
value. And it's like, okay, that's like a 1 to 9. Like, let's do it. That is sick ROI.
And if we can get it down to 25K and still achieve the 500K over, ooh.
Happy days. So I think the main thing is, like, you need to have a defined point of view on your performance, base
Yes.
rates, and then you need to understand how your performance is relative to your closest peer group. And then the challenge is the peer group and getting benchmarks, because private companies, not a lot of public data, et cetera, et cetera. So that's, you kind of got to aim small, miss small that way, but it should give you directional, kind of correct points of view on where you can be better, where you're outperforming, where you're average. So the cool part is, historically, this used to be a miserable exercise. You'd be like, oh my God, all right, I'm going to pull up the P&L. I'm going to figure out all these ratios. I'm going to do all this stuff. Okay, cool. This is what our base rates are. And then it's like, benchmark. Okay, I found the benchmarks. Let's go line by line. Okay, this one we're 50th percentile, which is out. And boom. Now it's like, we'll go through it, but it's literally like 10 minutes to establish a probably 90% accurate point of view on how you're performing relative to your peer group. So let's jump in. I want to talk, or I'm going to share my screen because I want to talk through, and there's a lot of flavors of benchmarks. But let's pull up this one. So I love SaaS Capital, and I'll probably have to bounce in a little bit. So, and this is, it depends on how micro you're playing right now. But so this one, the first thing to call out, so these are bootstrapped, AKA non-venture backed SaaS companies with 3 million to 20 million in ARR. And so that's a peer group. So this is assuming B2B SaaS for the most part. I guess one thing to call out is that it's based on a survey. So you gotta have to discount it a little bit. Like, how truthful are these people? And there's all weird kind of biases that come through in a survey. But you've got items, and for the listeners, you've got items in one column. So we're looking at revenue growth rate, net revenue retention, gross revenue retention, revenue per employee is interesting, customer acquisition cost. And then we start to get into these ratios that are a percentage of ARR. So hosting expense as a percentage of ARR, personnel costs associated with hosting as a percentage of ARR, customer support or success as a percentage of ARR. So the thing to note here is that most are percentages, which are rates, or they're ratios, which are also percentages. And then they're broken down. And this is a little bit weird how they did this, because if this was a bell curve, 50%, like, it would go like this, if you could see it. So basically they show 25th, 50th percentile, which is average. And then the thing that's a little bit wonky too is they didn't invert them, because, like, you would assume that you want to be 90th percentile in everything. But when percentage of spend, 90th percentile implies that you're spending more than, right? So they should have flipped these backwards for some of them, because to make it simple, it would just be like, we want to index, or we want to pursue the 90th percentile in every way. When it comes to costs, you don't want to be in the 90th percentile.
Exactly.
So, but just to simplify, you have 50th percentile in the middle, and that's considered average. And that's probably the most safe thing to kind of anchor around. 25th percentile, 70th percentile, and then 90th percentile. So it's a little bit wonky how they did it, but this is one of the best roundups of benchmarks ever. And it doesn't get into lead volume. It doesn't get into win rate, because that just requires too much nuance. So it's at just the right level of abstraction to be pretty applicable, really, regardless of what you're into. So cool. So that's
Quick call out.
Yes.
Thinking about the importance of visualizations, how you just described, they probably should have flipped the metrics, because you don't want your spend to be in the 90th percentile, right? Or at 90%, right? So with this, I would do more conditional formatting. So it's like green for the good cues, red for the bad cues. So it's easy to just scan.
Totally.
But
That's
this
one,
is a
like,
great roundup.
the conventional one is high growth, good.
Yes.
High churn, bad. So it's like green, red. And with, like, the profit well dropped some really, and their benchmarks were derived as a analytical layer that piped into systems of record. So those are the benchmarks you want to run through walls or pay money for, because they're from, like, underlying hard data. They're not survey based or whatever. But not to get too hung around the axle. So where do we go from here? And so just to talk through this, and I'll pull up these prompts, and I won't spend time going through the metrics. Like if there's a metric here that you don't understand, just it's a 2 sentences away from being clear. So that's that. So if we get into the good stuff, so it's literally 3 prompts. So the first is pick your favorite LLM, whatever, Claude, blah, 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 ChatGPT, it doesn't matter. Copy, right click and copy the image, the table of benchmarks, paste it in the context window or the chat window, and include it right out. Please digest the attached image providing benchmarks across a range of metrics for bootstrap SaaS businesses. And then you should get back like, I have internal, here is a recap of what I just read. And it's like, okay, sick. Then, and I like to have a little fun. I'm like, excellent, great work.
Yeah,
You're doing great.
I boost its ego all the time. I'm like, amazing job.
Like, this is extraordinary execution.
Yeah.
And then it's like, excellent. I now like to share a copy of our P&L/forecast. So you can make it kind of retroactive, or you can make it forward looking. P&L forecast for our bootstrapped SaaS firm. From there, I'd like you to provide a summary of our performance metrics and ratios. After that, I'd like you to compare our respective metrics and ratios against the benchmarks I just provided. Sound good? And then it'll say, yes, sounds good. Please, and then so you head over to your P&L, head over to your forecast, literally copy and paste the table into the context window and hit go. And then what you should get back is a summation of your base rates. This is what revenue growth looks like. This is what net dollar, probably won't be able to tell you net dollar retention, but this is what customer success spend as a percentage of ARR looks like. This is what sales and marketing as a percentage of ARR looks like. This is what your COGS kind of amount to. This is your gross margin. And that there is like, oh my God, I didn't have to touch a spreadsheet or model a goddamn thing. This is incredible. And so you're happy. And then it's going to give you what might look like this. And anything to add, Kev? I'm sorry, I'm going.
Yeah, no, you're good. So I was gonna say a few things. One, you always want to still double check the sources because your favorite LLM will at least tell you where it's searching, so you can still vet and confirm that, hey, this information does look somewhat accurate from what it's grabbing online. And additionally, while we jest about boosting the morale of ChatGPT or any LLM, it's important to provide that feedback because it's looking to understand what great, good, or bad responses are, and it's only going to get better the more you feed it and train it. So, yeah.
And that's like what we've always joked about. Like my dad said, when you're driving a 911, you don't hammer it, you squeeze it. So, and the same is with, and this is not like, this is a whole different conversation, but you want to kind of tease out really good insights. So it's like, give it something to comprehend, confirm comprehension, ask it to summarize it. Once you're confident that you're on the same page, then move on to the next ask, but give context where the thing is going. And then you just break it up into different, like you could break this up into maybe 5 prompts and your responses would get better. And then as Kev said, you want to stay in that feedback loop. Like this should be, please elaborate more deeply on the ratios that you see, or, et cetera, et cetera. And then I think
what sources did you use?
Yeah.
How did you summarize this? Like it will literally explain to you how it's analyzing and explaining everything. So it's like a personal tutoring session, and you're learning as the bot is also learning at the same time. It's amazing.
Yeah, and for those that are, I guess, a little more novice or early in their journey, maybe you just drop the table in and it's like, I want to learn about every one of these ratios.
Explain every row.
Explain every row. And why is it good to have a high ratio in some and a low ratio in others? Like help me understand what's good across these dimensions on a relative basis. So I want to understand it in percentiles. And what's useful to look at too is look at a bell curve. So normally distributed bell curves, they're called that because they look like a bell. So in the middle, where the highest magnitude of whatever it is average, as you get, it's like height, right? It's like most men of 30 years old are 5'10". So the middle 50th percentile is 5'10". The 8-foot tall people are 99th percentile. The 2-foot tall people are 2nd percentile. So, and sorry, I should have led with that because that's a good way to kind of grasp that visual, or without a visual. Yeah, it's a bell. It looks like a bell. All right, so this is what an example output would look like. So, and we used a forecast, and this is just an example with some dummy data, but it's like, okay, cool. We dropped in a forecast time period 2025 to 2029, and it's going to spit out, it says, cool, here's your revenue growth, bullet 1. here's the forecast, and here's kind of how I interpreted the growth rate. So we've got 41% growth the first year, 53% growth the second year, 33% growth the third. And this is kind of assuming that there's kind of more accelerative growth at the beginning and then it plateaus. And usually growth follows a curve like that because every incremental unit of growth is more difficult than the last. So it plateaus in some capacity, and you can think of it as a business maturity curve. You can think of it as a product maturity curve, but it usually flattens out over time. So cool. All right. That's accurate. Good job, LLM. Analysis. The forecast growth rate mostly hovers between the 50th and 75th percentile, suggesting a healthy growth trajectory between particularly between 26 and 27, which is at that 53.9%. Okay. So growth is 50th to 75th percentile. And I think an aim here is to probably hit 50th percentile across everything. So at least know your average, but you also want to look for crazy outliers. So it would be like your growth is 90th percentile and like, is that viable? Or like your forecasted growth. And this is where it's cool too, to actually, man, I should have mentioned this more explicitly, but to drop in a P&L with a forecast so that it can interpret real life base rates from historical performance and associate that with forecasted performance and just make sure that there's not too wide a gap. Because it could be like, okay, you've grown the business 20% year over year the last 3 years. The first year you're going to grow at 90%. Like you should maybe think about that. Or like, what are the underlying assumptions that allow you to like juice growth like that? So you want to be looking for like, this doesn't make, or you're such an outlier. Can you rationalize how you're going to get there on the good side? And then on the bad side, it's like, which is usually around spend. It's like, whoa, you're spending like your 90th percentile in hosting costs as a percentage of revenue. You're probably overspending on hosting. And this is back to the whole intent of this exercise. So anyway, we look at hosting expenses. And just to call out the items that we focused on: revenue growth, hosting expenses, everything that is an expense is as a percentage of revenue. So I won't say that every time. Hosting expenses, support expenses, sales and marketing, engineering and product, G&A or general and admin, which is just like your payroll, your salary, your executives, and then EBITDA margin. And then you get into some summary insights. So I'll just read one more, like hosting expenses. All right, your forecast shows hosting costs between 5.2 and 5.6%. Analysis. The hosting expenses align closely with the 50th percentile. This seems appropriate and competitive for the size and forecast of the business. Happy days. Move on. So this was a little bit loaded, I would say. So that's the last one I'll read. And then you get down to kind of the summary insights. And it's just kind of structured around strengths and opportunities for improvement, which is all you're looking for. Strengths. The forecast shows strong EBITDA margin, gross margins, and well-managed sales and marketing and engineering costs. The decrease in G&A expenses over time is a significant positive, indicating increasing efficiency. And so you want to see the thing spit back your assumptions, where it's like, we are going to reduce the G&A expense over time because there will be less time intense kind of activity required from the executive team or the transformation team. So those costs diminish over time. Product and engineering, you got to be if you're going to grow revenue pretty aggressively, you have to be careful to make that a percentage of revenue, or all of a sudden those costs start to balloon. So your investments in product and engineering shouldn't tie as a percentage directly to ARR on a linear basis. Usually you start to get more efficiency in product velocity and different things. So you want to see those costs structurally decline over time. So anyway, opportunities for improvement. Support expenses are slightly above the median, but not overly concerning. This, I was shocked that it said this. This could signal a strategic decision to overinvest in support and customer success, given the critical impact of retention and recurring revenue business.
That's one.
I was like, holy shit. I was like, exactly. And so for us, we always over-index in investments in customer success because recurring revenue is a retention and expansion game. Full stop. So it was wild that it caught that and suggested it. So that's kind of a wrap on this. And I think for the people listening, like as a next step from here, it's like, cool. I would like to brainstorm or expand on the opportunities for improvement. I would like to brainstorm on ways that we can reduce our cost structure for support. I'd like to talk about how we can reduce our customer acquisition costs, or how can we improve our net dollar retention, blah, blah, blah. And you're going to get generic answers, but at least 0 to 1 is kind of done for you. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, honestly. So
And one
Yeah,
honorable mention, I would say if you are going to go down the rabbit hole of that exercise, which we absolutely recommend, sign up for the premium version of ChatGPT or whatever your favorite tool is. Literally load some of your files, like your P&L and everything, and have it start being your business coach because it's only learning how to help you improve over time.
totally. $20 a month is, I'm not even going to say this out loud, but I would pay an insane amount a month. $20 a month for me is like 2 lattes. What a
It's too
joke.
cheap, dude. Like the
That is a
amount that we're able to get done on a daily basis, it's
oh
way
my
too
God,
cheap.
joke. Or it's like it's not going to last. Or I hope it does forever. Dear God, because it is the great multiplier of our generation.
Well, thank God the original mission was not to be a for-profitable business, right?
Yeah, shit, right. That's a whole different thing. So anyway, I guess just to recap, you can't get stronger if you don't know how strong you are.
I
Full
love it.
stop. And then you can't understand where you have the greatest opportunity to increase your strength unless you understand your strength relative to your closest peer group. It's as simple as that. And with ChatGPT, it's literally a copy and paste exercise to understand very quickly what your base rates are across a whole range of dimensions. And then whatever benchmarks you can find, the more granular, the more analogous to you, the better. And then you can just do a comparison. And then you understand, okay, like team, we got to figure out, or it's like our growth is, and then, this is where there's no real silver bullet, but it's like, hey, our growth sucks relative to our peer group. Okay, you got a lot of work to do. Ideally, it's more about like, hey, ideally you go through this exercise and it's like you're average across the board. Happy days, right? Or like this is a good point of departure, or at least you're above average, in most areas. And then you'll have some real outliers. So it's like, hey, you're over investing a ton in customer success. And it's like, cool, that was intentional. We see that as a strategic decision. So you want this to basically just be one big reality check. And then also help you figure out what your map towards I guess increasing business value looks like. Simple as that.
What's that?
All right. Till next time, for the love of the game.
All
All right, Kjael, go get him the rest of the day, my guy. Happy
right, you
B-Day.
too.
All right.
Thank you. Take care, player.
Peace, buddy. Cheers.